Okay. All right, a couple of things. The last few months, last several months, probably about, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months, spent a lot of my time in a nursing home taking care of, someone who sort of became my adopted aunt. And, I grew quite fond of her. And there's a lot of things that I liked about her because, she clearly didn't have a problem with men. She liked male energy. And, one of the things that kind of like I found somewhat heartening about her and brought me some, delight is that she would watch, her favorite shows to watch on TV were Westerns. So we watched, the Western Channel with old Westerns, Gunsmoke, and, how the West was won. See, what's the other one? Can't think of the other one's name yet. Wells Fargo. So, in these stories, and I want to sort of, I'll back it up here a little bit or go out of context here for a second. In the modern, I remember like a few years ago, I don't know, for the last, I don't know, like 20 years or so, like we've been hearing this thing about like writing, like there needs to be more strong women characters in movies and stuff. Like we need to write strong female characters. And, so there's this big deal been made about like glorifying women in some way that, it's like, I understand, where that sentiment sort of comes from, and, it sounds kind of nice on the surface, but, it's sort of like, it's like what we get in movies nowadays and, TV shows in some ways, perhaps, the female characters are more interesting, but, a lot of times, in a lot of the ways it's that really matter, women are not necessarily being portrayed as like strong, interesting women. They're like portrayed as like masculine women that are interesting because now we've written a man's character but a woman is playing, the role that would like traditionally be considered masculine. And so it doesn't really so much glorify femininity, it glorifies masculinity. And, like, whatever gender you want to be is fine, but, regardless of what sex, you're born with. But at the same time, it's like, you can't say that you want strong feminine characters, female characters, when the only fucking thing you're doing is repurposing like what is considered masculine and then putting it on a woman, and then because what you're doing is you're saying that the male way to do things is the strong, interesting way to do things. And so, we can't make women interesting based on femininity. We have to make them interesting based on masculine strength. And that's really kind of fucked up and insidious. And I don't think, Hollywood is nuanced enough to really have gotten this through their thick fucking heads yet. So anyway, before I went off on this tangent, I was talking about, the reason I point this out is because this leads into my next point. But I'm watching, movies in the nursing home with my aunt. And, we're watching TV shows, old Westerns. And you know what occurred to me about these old Westerns is that women are actually far more interesting in Gunsmoke, in How the West Was Won. And they're strong, intelligent, and wise in ways I don't see too much like in modern television. They're portrayed in a way that they stand on their own merits, and and the men respect these women and their wisdom and what the women bring. These brave women who they're hypothetical characters and stories on TV, but these women that were rugged women in the West, they didn't do the same stuff and didn't fulfill the same roles that the men did, because they literally it was more suitable for the men to do these types of things. And then the women had strengths that that were very vital things that they provided to the men and to themselves and to their children and to their friends, their families. They were strong female characters, is what I'm trying to say. These were really well written, you think of older TV shows, and the temptation is oh, that shit is old, that's outdated, it's boring, this is not how people are, the acting, how could it be any better back then? But actually, in the way that women are portrayed, I think some of the Western stories are far more they had a far more natural they had a far more natural depiction of women that is more feels more authentically feminine than what is kind of shoehorned in today's entertainment. And I think in a lot of ways the men were more interesting as well, because they were they're less, they have less of the neurotic sort of hyper compensatory problems that the men of today have, where men nowadays try to be either too pandering and feminine to appeal to the more leftist attitude that is more pervasive throughout culture, or they try to be compensatory, toxic, cartoonishly, embarrassingly masculine, while really coming off they don't really like women. They just fucking, it's they're trying to, I don't know, it's on the one hand they're trying to appeal to women by being this hyper masculine thing, but on the other hand they just fucking hate women. So it's what, okay, what are you trying? That doesn't seem to, something's not clicking in the brains here, and it's how is this appealing to so many fucking pathetic men who are trying to be these, I don't know, it's kind of pathetic on both sides, and there's no real integration happening, because men aren't really thinking about, oh, what is it that I am actually how can I be the strong me, that I actually am, and instead of trying to be this fucking cartoon character, because the role models are totally fucked, in today's world, and what's available is acceptable is just ugh. Anyway, so now I wanted to switch a little bit and talk about a movie that I was watching last night, and it's a really good, I don't know, it's it's the synchronicities of what sort of rolls around, what kind of energy do we have to be in for certain types of things to come along that kind of talk about the subject that we're interested in at the time. It's kind of interesting somehow, the media that falls in the lap. And I was like, oh, shit, this is like somehow pertinent. This feels like it works out some issue that I have inside of myself. But yeah, so I was watching Paul Newman in this movie called Hombre, and I think it's like made in the 70s or so. So, it's and it had, so it's Paul Newman and Barbara Rush is like the female lead in, his counter sort of part in this movie. And there was a circumstance in it that I thought was kind of interesting in terms of like what I've, has like been kind of like in the zeitgeist about male-female relations. And, Paul Newman is kind of like this guy who's like lived with Native Americans, and he's kind of like very ruggedly independent. He doesn't really fuck around. If somebody is messing around, he doesn't really, he's like slow to interfere, because he doesn't like fight battles that he's gonna lose. But when, the people that he cares about are threatened, or, something is pertinent to him, he stands up very quickly and makes very decisive action and is like absolutely lethal in his response. Or, appropriately measured, if that is also what is required. So there's this interesting scene I thought was, it's like, it shows you some of like the innate wisdom of males, like, and the innate wisdom of women, and how we differ in how we look at things. But how, it's like, anyway, I'll describe the scene. There's the scene where they've gotten on the stagecoach, or they're about to get on the stagecoach. They're like waiting in a waiting room, and the stagecoach has been filled up. Everyone has their tickets, and some like really creepy scoundrel like comes in, and he's like, "Hey, I need a ride. One of you guys needs to give me my ticket." And one of you guys needs to give me your ticket, because I have to have, it's like, I want what I want, and I don't give a fuck how I get it. One of you guys is going to give it to me. So at first he approaches Paul Newman. Paul Newman. Paul Newman is like not moved. He's like very like self-contained, but very absolutely sort of like, immovable in, like, this is my ticket. Good luck trying to get it. If you want to get it, I wouldn't recommend, the outcome that may happen if you do. Essentially, that's like the sort of don't fuck with me energy that came off of him. And so, there's this other guy who's kind of like more, he's a little bit more nervous, but he's like, there's like these women around. And so I think, like, this is my hypothesis. He thinks, a nobleman would like, sort of stand up for someone else, and, they would like, do the right quote unquote thing. And so the other guy sort of tries to get involved, and it's like, hey, like, he tries to defend Paul Newman and help Paul Newman and say, hey, stop bullying him. He doesn't have to give you his ticket if he doesn't want to, And, and now, the bad guy, now he catches a whiff of that. Oh, okay. This guy's a nervous wuss. He stuck his, this guy's a tall grass that wants to get its, head chopped off. He just sort of showed me its belly. And now he's like, okay, well, I'm taking your ticket, buddy. You're less trouble than Paul Newman would be. You're like trying to be this knight in shining armor for Paul Newman, and to like sort of be impressive to these women. But really what you've done is reveal that you have bark, but like I can tell that you don't have any bite, because you're not really trying to do the right thing. You're trying to do the right thing that you think it's about appearances. But we know what the right thing is more by our wisdom of like what is likely going to be the outcome here if I stand my ground. And if it seems like I'm going to lose this fight, I don't give a shit what the perception is of the people around me. I'm not going to be on the ground bleeding because I wanted to impress these, women, these strangers, with my nobility. So that's sort of like what Paul Newman understood, but this guy kind of didn't. And so he made himself a target for a bully who knew, weakness when he smelled it. So anyhow, yeah, so like basically the bad guy, intimidates this other guy. He says, okay, you want to hold on to your ticket? All right, let's step outside and I'm willing to like shoot you. I'm willing to duel you and kill you over this ticket. Are you ready for that? Or do you just want to like, give me your ticket? Because that would be a lot easier for you. So yeah, the guy kind of, he backs down and realizes, there's no way I'm going to win here. All right, so, and then what's kind of interesting about this is Barbara Rush, the very interestingly, well-written female character was sort of, playing the heroine. So Barbara Rush is so far, like you can tell like that she is someone who's pretty wise, pragmatic, and intelligent, and she's lived out here on the frontier for a long time, and she's dealt with a lot of shit. But on the next morning, on the next day, she kind of takes issue with Paul Newman and says, hey, like this guy stood up for you. Why didn't you stand up for him? And so on the surface of it, it's like, it seems like she's being a little bit disrespectful to him and kind of like challenging his ego, because she's got like her ethics and what she thinks would be the right thing to do, because her heart sees this poor man, getting his ticket stolen from him. He gets his ticket stolen from him, and she senses in Paul Newman that, he is a capable man who could have done something, but for whatever reason, he didn't do what he did. So, her approach on the surface seems a bit indignant and a little bit disrespectful. But if you think about it and see like more what's behind it, she's actually saying, hey, I respect you. You've got like a lot of like masculine inner strength, and you are very self-contained, and you look like a man who knows what to do. Like, why didn't you do anything? because it seems like you have character and a sense of what is right and wrong. I can feel it, but it's like puzzling to me why a man who is strong, and could do something, didn't do something when it seems like it's the right thing to do. Because, in her female body, she can't really actually challenge the bad guy herself. And, even if she wanted to, she knows, she's just not, capable in challenging a predator in that particular way. So, but she sees Paul Newman and she sees, okay, a man, he could match this other man's strength. Why didn't he? So that shows you like how women sometimes think of chivalry, and how women will sometimes take issue with men and try to like get them to do something, to make a move that requires some courage, because in their heart they want to make that move, but it would be better if the man did it. But, what she doesn't really necessarily see is what the man sees, because she has a woman's wisdom and Paul Newman has a man's wisdom. This is not a man who's fucking been around, for about 5 minutes. So he's like out here trying to do the noble thing to impress people, who gets himself laid out on the ground and then, broken over a battle that wasn't worth fighting. He's seen this shit, He looks like someone who's at least in his mid-40s, if not older, and he knows, it's life and death out here. It's fucking life and death. And if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to die, it's not going to be for somebody who was trying to play the white knight, even if on the surface, my heart kind of like is a little bit moved by, okay, yeah, this guy's trying to like stand up for me. But, the reality is I can't really, do I want to get into a gunfight with a fucking, a guy who I can see has killed people before? Like, I know that, it's like, I know I've seen people like this man. I know what they're capable of. Do I really over someone losing their ticket on a stagecoach, do I want to fucking fight to the death with somebody else that is clearly fucking, sociopathic and willing to kill to do what he wants to do, And so he sees this because he's been living on the frontier. The woman, she doesn't quite see that point of view. But she does see a strong man who could do something, but for whatever reason doesn't. Now later on, she shows her wisdom. And when it's time to do something and not to do something. So it's interesting because she's kind of almost like, by having this conversation with Paul Newman after the fact, she's kind of tipping her hat to him in a way, but also, she's a little bit puzzled by it. But the real thing that she's doing is that she's kind of like working it out in her mind, Like, what is it that motivates a man? What is a good man, Because that's sort of like the question that she, in her woman's heart, is kind of asking. Is what is a good man? And when is it, how do we know a good man is a good man? That's kind of like the bigger question that maybe not be fully conscious to her, but it is sort of what is underneath it. Now later on, she shows that she has a similar type of wisdom. There's a young woman who's a bit of a, I don't know what, like what do you want to call it? But she's a bit immature, and she's with a young man. They're like in their early 20s, and she doesn't, she complains a lot, and he's kind of tired of her, and she senses that, so she feels insecure that he doesn't really love her anymore, essentially. This is all like the subtext. So she like makes more trouble for him to try to like re-engage his heart, to catch his attention, so that because she feels sort of insecure that he still loves her, but because he clearly has some doubts because he gets annoyed with her. Anyhow, so one of her antics, you got the bad guy. He bullied his way onto the stagecoach. They sort of pause, take a break. The bad guy goes off somewhere alone. The blonde girl, who's like a young woman, she goes and approaches this man and starts flirting with him. Now, because she says, "Oh yeah, you were so assertive. I can see that you're like a man who, gets, like does what he wants to do, and he's like totally, like he gets what he wants, and is a strong man, And she might be right, this man has a particular type of strength, but he has the strength of a killer, a predator, someone who's not gonna be too good for a woman, too healthy. But, she's going up there essentially. Her point is, what she's trying to do is essentially like create some drama to get the other guy's, her young husband's attention, so that she can feel loved again. But, like, he's like, they're alone. He doesn't have any scruples, the bad guy. So he forces her on the ground, and he's like, it looks like he's about to, violate her. He like kisses her forcefully, and she like pulls away, and he just like starts laughing. And she's like super upset, shook up by this. Didn't realize, it was gonna fucking go this fucking badly. But she runs into, on her way back to the camp, she runs into Barbara Rush. She's all upset. She wants to go tell her husband, like to go to defend her honor immediately. And Barbara Rush is like, says like, hey, wait a minute. Like you went up there with motives that weren't noble, and you put yourself in a dangerous situation, and you're lucky you didn't get hurt. But now what you're trying to do essentially is get your husband to get involved in something that is basically going to get him killed, because like your husband is like kind of, he's kind of a dork, he's like kind of weak and nervous, and he's not a bad guy, but he doesn't really, if he has to like go defend her honor because of this antic, that's gonna lead to death for him, because this guy is a killer who knows how to kill, and people who have practice at things are better than people who don't have practice. So a killer is gonna kill a young man who's just like nervously trying to do his best to keep his woman happy. You know, he's not really like thinking about like, oh, how am I going to kill this guy who's challenging me. He's going to think like, oh fuck, you know, like I got to make sure I do the sufficient amount of, he's going to, you know, he's going to basically, yeah, he's probably going to like, if, you know, he's probably going to get injured or killed trying to defend you. So don't be so quick to run to your husband and telling him about this. This is not good for his ears. This is not good for all those involved. You know, you tried to create some drama. You put yourself in a bad position. You know, accept that you made a mistake and move on and leave this alone. So that's Barbara Rush's, you know, response to her. And that shows that she understands that there's times when it appears like on the surface, you know, that one should do the noble thing, but actually the noble thing to do is, you know, wait and see and, you know, maybe do nothing so that we don't create more chaos and destruction than is warranted. And so, you know, it's you know, to sum this up, you know, it's like we had well-written, strong women characters, you know, all throughout, from what I can tell, is like pretty early on in the advent of television. And you know, and I like seeing this because looking in different eras, you can see, you know, different perspectives, and, you know, you can see that we're not just in this current place and time that we are. You know, who we are is not completely defined by the times that we live in, because like once we sort of zoom out and, you know, we go even further, you know, than just like the 70s or the 60s and the attitudes of that, where we read books from other, you know, millennias, other centuries, you know, we get a more well-rounded picture of what it actually means to be human. And, you know, we can kind of like see like some of the, you know, like in current times, we're very like quick to just, you know, talk about progress and, you know, how everything is better now than it was before, you know, like that somehow like progress is what is happening. But that's kind of like, you know, progress is kind of a myth, you know. The reality is we have what we have right now. Every age has had what it's had. And what every age has had, it's had its issues and it had its benefits. And so by studying other eras, we can kind of see the more universal elements of what it's like to be human and get a better holistic picture of what it is that we really want for ourselves inside of ourselves. That is more, you know, makes us less a slave to like current public opinions and the zeitgeist. And it makes us more in charge and gives us a greater wisdom about humanity, because we can, you know, see more fully what it really means to be ourselves and human. And so anyhow, I like this period of time where I got to see some Westerns from, you know, previous eras. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that, you know, it was actually the case that, you know, they're interesting, intelligent, strong, and powerful women did exist in, you know, in Hollywood, in the writing. And, you know, a lot of what has been talked about is actually kind of bogus with regard to that in more current times. And, you know, what we've ended up with on television nowadays is kind of like a neurotic mess of things that just, like, when I watch TV nowadays with a lot of the more current shows, I just like get anxiety because like the values are just so fucking all over the place, and like we're like expected to root for people who are really just being self-destructive and destructive to everyone else around them, and we're just going based on charisma, and I don't know, it's just kind of weird. So anyhow, just some things that interested me lately, and I think I'll leave it here. Have a good one.